Saturday night in the Cocody neighborhood of Abidjan, Ivory Coast's jet set roams the streets in their shiny cars. Nightlife has picked up again, and so has crime.
A Hyundai has just been held up near the alleyway pharmacy.
Carjackings, armed robbery, racketeering. Since Ivory Coast's post-electoral crisis, this is the daily drill for Lieutenant Sonkonde. He's in charge of a new security unit within the police force.
Last month, there were about 20 car holdups a day. With this new system, we brought the figure down to 10 a day. Last week, we managed to go a whole week without a single holdup in the neighborhood of Cocody. But crime has increased again in the last couple of days.
6,000 escaped prisoners are still on the loose. They're taking advantage of a weak administration that's trying to get back on its feet. Since April, fighting and heavy gunfire has stopped in the neighborhood, but the stigma of war is still very present. Tonight, an anonymous call leads the police to a stash of weapons abandoned in these bushes.
What we have here is 2 SIGs, 2 AKs, 2 hunting rifles, and an RPG. There are also bullets and magazines. Given the state they're in, these weapons have been here for a while.
At the height of the crisis, the police confiscated at least 5 stashes of hidden weapons a week. Now it's once a month. After an extended absence, police units are starting to redeploy across the country, moving back into police stations that were ransacked and pillaged during the crisis, if they weren't occupied by soldiers from the Ivory Coast's Republican forces. We're here in the business district of Abidjan, known as the Plateau. The head of the police unit here is this woman.
Attention, at ease.
She's in charge of about 60 men and women, and every day she has sent backup of about 100 riot control forces.
When new recruits arrive, I send them to the streets of the Plateau district to keep order there. Some have weapons, which they can use if needed. But in general, they're there to maintain order. So it's about being present on the streets, being seen, in order to reassure people.
Superintendent Toure's men patrol the streets of the Plateau. They have 7 Kalashnikovs to share among 100 officers. Even though they tell local businessmen that their presence is intended to dissuade crime, an unarmed police officer isn't very reassuring.
What we need is more security. Yesterday, my friend's shop was robbed. They took everything. So what we really need is to beef up security.
That's why we're patrolling here.
Abidjan is far from being completely safe, but it's safe enough for locals to get back to work. The port had ground to a halt for 6 months. Now cranes are once again filling containers with coffee and cocoa. This transport and logistics business was a collateral victim of the conflict. Nowadays, ships are coming back, and these bags of rice from Indonesia will be transported to other African countries like before.
We went through a really quiet period. Ships stopped coming through for a long time, and that really affected us financially. We suffered a lot, but thank God, things picked up again.
Like many businesses, this 100% Ivorian company that's listed on the Paris stock market had to slash wages to avoid laying people off. Sales have tumbled 65% since the beginning of the year. The goal now is to make up for losses.
The end of the crisis was warmly welcomed by operators like us because it allowed us to move on, to increase our activity and try to make up our losses.
Ivory Coast's economy is in recession, but it should pick up again thanks in part to help from the international community. According to IMF forecasts, growth should reach 8% in 2012. President Ouattara is keen to show that change is happening and quickly. He has an ambitious agenda and is putting a lot of pressure on the government. Abidjan is a window into the country from the outside world, and as such, it needs a makeover.
We're going to ask you to leave. Please do it now. We'll give you a hand.
Since mid-September, these urban hygiene officers have popped up on big avenues in town. Their operation has been dubbed Clean Country, but they often clash with poor street vendors who have no other income and nowhere else to go.
You can sell and do business in the market. Sidewalks are for pedestrians. Now, if you take over the sidewalks and pedestrians can't move around, they're going to have to go into the roads. And the roads are for the cars.
You need to understand us. We're used to this. Listen, we're used to this. And we can't change our habits just like that.
As soon as the officers turn their back, the street vendors take over the sidewalks once again. Clearly, changing habits won't come as quickly as President Ouattara hopes it will.
It's true that my life has changed. Things are completely different from the way they were before. My friends will understand with time, because little by little, as we explain things to them, they'll start to understand, and they will change.
Koulibaly's life has indeed radically changed. During the crisis, he quit his studies to take up arms. He was one of many young people who joined militia from both sides, just like these young men who have gathered in these barracks. Hippolyte Baillet, nicknamed Commander Gladian, is a former militia leader who backed Laurent Gbagbo. Along with several of his men, he surrendered and joined Alassane Ouattara's ranks.
People are confident again, life is good, and we're back to business. Everybody here belongs in the same family, there are no differences. We are living in perfect harmony with our brothers here.
Many fighters are still hiding across the country or went into exile out of fear of reprisals. 20,000 of them decided to hand in their weapons. These young men are still in uniform, but officially they're civilians.
We're not giving them military training as such, but we're trying to give them a structure so they don't get out of control and go under the radar. They're all grouped together and under supervision.
They have three options: join the army, learn a trade, or participate in a social project as part of the demobilization. One day, Baillet also hopes to hand in his uniform and open a bakery.
I've given myself the mission to make sure that all these young people we've trained as soldiers have a job and food on their plates. Those that want to join the army can join the army. As a war leader, I want peace in their hearts.
Peace, a word that often comes back like a mantra for many Ivorians. But in the west of the country, it's far from being achieved. A third of the conflict's victims have been accounted for. According to a United Nations report, 800 people were killed in the town of Douekoué alone. The region is in majority populated by members of the Guéré animist ethnic group that was loyal to Laurent Gbagbo. Many were killed in the conflict, their villages destroyed, like this one, 3 kilometers outside Douekoué. Is this where you lived?
This is my home. These 2 apartments belong to me. It's all I have left, the rest went up in smoke.
The village burned down in March during an offensive by pro-Ouattara forces. Jean-Marie Gougnon made it out alive. His family is safe in Abidjan, but he doesn't want to leave his land.
I used not to grow this. Circumstances are such that I've had to convert my courtyard to make sure I have food in the future. I'm not used to growing beans, it's not my speciality.
He used to grow cocoa and coffee, but he can't go back and work his fields because he's afraid of running into those who destroyed his village. 7,000 people used to live there. 3 months on, only 824 residents have dared come back.
I've asked locals to come back. Our resources are the forests and plantations. If people stay away from the plantations, how are we going to survive? Our brothers from across the way, who want to work more, can push their boundaries and go into the forest and do what they want. And tomorrow we'll come along and find rubber tree and cocoa stalks.
To meet the so-called brothers, you just have to cross the road. They're from Burkina Faso as well as the north and center of Ivory Coast. They back the current leader and thus are on the right side of the chessboard today. But that wasn't the case in March or back in 2002. During these crises, they were persecuted by Guerre militiamen.
There used to be lots of houses here before. Lots of people lived here. The village was right here. Everything burned down. Some people have come back to fix their houses and others haven't returned yet.
These families once were discriminated because of the nearly sacrosanct principle of ivority. Now that the forces loyal to President Ouattara control the region, these families are feared. There are several mixed couples in the village and many people are pushing for reconciliation.
It's really sad now. Without our neighbors, it doesn't feel right. We want them to come back, so we can sit with them like we used to. It's thanks to them that we're here on this land.
Yesterday's oppressors, the Guerres, are now afraid, especially of the Dozos. Traditional hunters, the Dozos joined the ranks of Alassane Ouattara's forces, and they still control many checkpoints along the roads. Because of that, rather than go home, many Guerres would rather stay in this refugee camp run by NGOs.
We want to go back to our village. They just have to take the weapons away from the Dozos.
It's almost like being back at home, except for a water fountain replaces the village well. It's a different story in the Naibli camp, opened last July to free up the Catholics' mission camp in Douekoué, where 4,500 people are living in cramped conditions. During the conflict, 14-year-old Juliana had to have her leg amputated following a gunshot wound. The 2002 conflict had already left her an orphan. She lives in this tent with her 7 brothers and sisters.
She used to be happy and talk to everybody. After what happened, she just sits around and doesn't open her mouth. She's traumatized.
Traumatized, along with the rest of the country that seems stuck in a cycle of political crises. A Truth, Reconciliation and Dialogue Commission has been created to try and bring Ivorians together. If progress is made in the West, a big step will have been taken towards reconciling Ivory Coast.